Good morning, New Day Fellowship. What do scientists look for when they look for a habitable planet? Kind of getting words jangled. Um, a planet that will sustain human life. What is the one thing that they are looking for most of all? And that is water. You might say, well, it's oxygen, it's carbon dioxide, all those things. Well, we can kind of make ways to do that. In fact, oxygen is part of the makeup of water. But that's what they're looking for. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. Well, did you know that roughly 7 times more than the total volume of all the Earth's rivers combined is in our atmosphere? There's roughly enough water in our atmosphere to rain 1 inch over the entire surface. So our atmosphere has water in it. Water is not just contained in rivers and oceans, but it's in our air. That's kind of an important thing when you think about how big the earth is, and yet it could rain 1 inch all over the earth at all times, at one time. Roughly 7 times more than total volume all the world's rivers contain. If you don't believe that there's water in the air, live in Houston for a while. Wear some glasses in Houston is even more impressive, because you go from an air conditioned building to outside, there's condensation on your glass, you can't see. You go from a car to outside, you spend all day kind of changing the condensation on your glasses if you're going in and out, outside, inside. And there are days you can almost just feel the moisture in Houston and almost breathe it. And in Costa Rica, it's quite interesting, because in Costa Rica, when we were there, now this may have just been during that time, but during the rainy season, it rains every day around noon, or it did when we were there. And the missionary knew that, so we were always eating in a place that was covered, and we'd wait till the rain stopped. But the missionary could almost set their clock by it. So our biggest requirement for a place to eat lunch was someplace that was covered, because we knew it was going to rain. Water in the air provides something that we'll talk a little bit about later, that was a promise from God, but a rainbow exists because of water in the air. Because the light hits the water in the air, the water creates a prism effect, and that's how it breaks up the light, and we can see the bands from the rainbow. And then it goes on Genesis 9, and God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. About 71% of the earth's surface is water. Somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the surface of the earth is water. More water than there is land. Weird thing, human bodies, we're not composed of water. I mean, we're made of carbon. We're carbon, based. But our goal is to actually hold water. 2/3 of our body's water, and 1/3 of our body is inorganic other stuff. Well, I told you that the Earth's surface is about 2/3 water, 1/3 land. We're about 2/3 water, 1/3 land. Kind of a way to think about it. Kind of weird. You can't talk about water with talking about water as a molecule. It should be a simple molecule. It has 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Scientists know that it should be a tetrahedron. When I say a tetrahedron, that's a three-dimensional shape that's got 4 sides. Well, that the angles of this tetrahedron, because the hydrogens are moving around the oxygen, there's all these bands. It should be 109.5 degrees, but it's a little odd because it's 104.5. So that's kind of an odd thing, that even water has an abnormal shape compared to what would be predicted. Well, is water important to scientists? Well, the metric system, the way it all's based on 1 cc weighs 1 gram at 39 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 degrees Celsius. The way we get the metric system on how we weigh stuff and do volumes is based on water. If you take a 3 millimeter water, like pipette dropper, and you drop 20 drops at 4 degrees Celsius, that is 20 cc's is 20 drops is 1 cc of water. 1 cc of water is the space of, like I said, of a little cube of water is 20 drops, and that cube weighs 1 gram. So the entire metric system is based off of using water as our basis for getting that. So, and for us to think about water from the English system, let's go even bigger. Water weighs about 8.3 pounds per gallon. So a 10-pound fish tank weighs 83 pounds. So water gets heavy real fast. When you start, like a 100-gallon fish tank is 830 pounds. So if you're going to put a fish tank in, you better make sure you got enough supports for it, because it's going to weigh a lot on the floors, a lot whatever. I don't know if anybody has ever watched those shows where they build the fish tanks, but they have to be thinking about the weight of the water more than anything else. So Archimedes says that the weight of something is what it displaces. So just weigh the water. Archimedes' principle, he said, if you want to know how much something is, put it in water, how much water gets displaced, in other words, how much does the water rise, how much volume that is, that's how much it weighs. So why am I talking about water? Well, spent the last week, I had some much needed vacation time, and we went to a lake, and I spent the entire week either on water, in water, or by water, around water. When I say on water, I have a little sailboat, and if you want to talk about something that can teach you faith, God is in control of that wind. God is in control of those waves. And so sailing seems like a simple thing, but there's a lot of work to it. There's a lot of thinking to it. Simpler sailboats are good, but sailboats can turn over. You can end up with a sailboat actually doing what they call turtling, which means the entire bottom is up and the mast is down in the water. And so you've got to figure out how to be able to maneuver that. And the wind, if you don't have your sails set just right, it can blow you over. Or you can do weird things like pivot and come over. And so there are a lot of things about just controlling that wind with that cloth that you have. First time I took the boat out, I had, it's actually a sailboat that's really fast. It's a little one, but it's fast. And it's made for that. Well, I had a full sail and I caught the wind and it turned it over and I never could get it back. And fortunately, some guy rescued me with a jet ski and pulled it to shore where I could regroup and everything else. This time I never turned over. Had one, and that's also because I got smaller sails and less mass. So now I'm getting less air, less air when I catch it. But even with that, you can be moving at a decent clip even with that smaller sail. And at one point, the wind just kind of caught it, and I was not really expecting it. And I ended up kind of like it. The boat is what they call keeling, I think it is, but it turns on its side. It was doing some of that. I was like, whoa. But on the water. And, if you mess up, you end up in the water. And at one point, fortunately, Abby was there with something to rescue me. I was trying to transition from the jet ski to the deal, and I fell in, and the boat was taking off. So Abby grabbed me and grabbed the boat, brought it back to me, and I got back in. Without that, I'd have just been floating in my life jacket and gone. By the way, can't help it as an emergency physician throw in water safety. When you're around water, you need a life jacket. When you're around water, you need a knife. You need to have those two things. And you're like, why? Well, in the water, there are things like ropes and there are things like fishing line, things you can tangle up in. So you may need the rope to cut that off. And you may need the life jacket in case you end up in the water so it'll help you float because you'll get tired. But just words of advice. So, water, but like, oh, and the other thing is there was a pool where we're staying, so it's in the water, on the water, around the water all the time. Spent a week doing that. So, what about the principle? I don't know if you've ever asked this. What about the principle that dense things sink and less dense things float? You would think that when water freezes, it's ice and it should be dense and it should float. I mean, sink, right? Heavy stuff sinks, dense stuff sinks. Wait a minute. I just told you that when you take water and turn it to ice, ice is hard. Why doesn't it sink? I told you that there's this funny structure that the scientists even say that the angles are not what they should be and all this stuff. Water is amazing, and the reason that I specified that it weighs 1 gram, 20 drops, 1 gram at 4 degrees Celsius. Remember, on the Celsius scale, 0 is freezing. As the water gets close to freezing, it is actually the densest, and water cannot be made more dense than at 4 cc, so water itself cannot freeze without becoming less dense. So it goes from a dense state as water that's very cold before it turns to ice, and then it is less dense because those molecules don't like that much attraction and they push away. And so ice is actually less dense than water at 4 degrees Celsius. So ice floats. You'd think that is critical that process happens. Let's say that it did sink, then the bottom of the rivers and the ocean would be very cold, and the top would be warmer, so the fish would be swimming at the top. If they didn't get caught up in it, it also means that things would freeze from the bottom to the top instead of from ice from the top to the bottom. But the other thing about this whole thing of water that's amazing is that 4 degrees Celsius, which is the most dense that water can be, not ice, it sinks. So water that it's about to freeze actually sinks, and the water that is frozen floats. So that process, you can imagine it's going to be coming down and up, down and up, down and up. It makes a motion which brings oxygen and stuff down to the fish, and then the ice comes up. But that bringing process of that water going down also brings other things, not just oxygen and that sort of stuff, but it also brings foodstuffs. It makes the waters come in that brings things down for them to eat. I don't know if you've ever heard about lakes turning over. I wonder if this has, I actually didn't even think about this until now, but they talk about bodies of water turning over. I wonder if it has something to do with temperatures and all that stuff. But that's a normal process going on all the time. We just don't see it in the big ways that when they talk about lakes turning over. So that water is in motion. And that motion of that body of water is what protects those fish. Otherwise, they could get frozen into blocks and die. So that process protects us. We can drill a hole and fish for fish. But the fish are still good. They're underneath there, not frozen into it. I mean, it can happen. If a small amount of water, they can be frozen in blocks of ice. We know that. But overall, the process actually helps. So, also talking about water being dense, well, is water hard or is water soft? We think about water being soft. But if you were a high diver, diving boards, Acapulco, all those kind of things, water is very hard. If water is not disturbed, the molecules of water really attract each other. It likes itself, it sticks together. If you notice in the Olympics at the high diving board, there's always something dripping water into that pool. Otherwise, it's an equivalent of those divers of hitting concrete. If they hit that water and that water surface is not moving, then it's hard and they can die. And the Acapulco divers, and this is something I got to play with as a mischievous kid, we found some cliffs at a lake, and I guess our parents didn't know where we were. We were young men anyway, but we found some cliffs, and one of the guys said, well, my dad's been here and we've had the depth finder and it's deep. Okay, so we were fine. So one of them jumped off. Well, then we all jumped off. And I thought, well, if I'm going that deep, oh my gosh, it was so far off the deal, you could yell, Geronimo! And grab your breath. And in fact, if you didn't get your breath before you hit, it was hard to get back to the surface because you were running out of air. It was incredible. But I decided, okay, they're going to do this. I'm going to be the Acapulco diver. No, everybody else jumping feet first. I thought I want to try it. So I did this perfectly. God was good because when I hit the water, your hands are now flat. It hit me in the forehead. My hands came up. Fortunately, it didn't hit me in the nose. It probably broke my nose. But it bounced like that because I did a perfect dive like you normally do in low water. And then we discovered, next friend that went off, because I came back up, we talked about it. Next one went off, fists. Fists, if you watch the Acapulco divers, that's what they do. Right before they get to, they'd make a beautiful dive, and then right before they watered, they do this. Just like your feet are kind of solid. So God made us to jump into water feet first, generally. Most of us aren't going to dive. But if you are going to dive, make fists, don't make hands. But this attraction of water to itself is also incredibly important. If you think about an umbrella really has holes in it. You know, you could take, something and blow through it. It's an umbrella. It has holes. Why does it work? Because the water attracts itself, and you notice it kind of beads up, and so it doesn't go through that umbrella. Now, you can touch the inside and change that surface tension like in a tent and make it leak. But, tents and umbrellas have the same principle that the water sticks to itself and stays on the outside instead of coming through. But if you touch it, well, if you also get water and turn on a strobe light, it's going to blow your mind. Because when you see it coming out of the tap, it looks like it's a string of water. It looks like it's all connected. And I'm not talking about the water coming that has, an aerator and all that stuff. I'm just saying if you can get water to just flow and look at it, it looks like it's a solid string. Like, oh, it's all together. You put it under strobe light and you start lighting it up, your eyes now see that water is made up of droplets. There are droplets all the way through that chain. You don't see it because it looks solid, but it's not. You take a strobe and hit that water, and you'll see the drops. Water sticks together. In Genesis 2:6, and like I said, I'm going through, and in fact, I was going to do water in the entire Bible, but I found out there's way too much. I'm going to have to do it as two sections. This is just Old Testament. In Genesis 2:6, the Hebrew text describes a mist, fog, dew, or vapor, rising from the land and watering the entire surface of the ground. In other words, it didn't rain. It didn't need to. In the morning, the temperature changes was enough that it have condensation, and the condensation is what watered all the plants. So you got to say that those temperatures are pretty nice. It's kind of like Hawaii temperatures, it's got to be because it's very comfortable. But it was close to the condensation of water, so it didn't rain. Adam and Eve didn't get rained on at night. They didn't need a shelter. They needed cover. In the morning, it would kind of cover the plants. Everything got wet. It was fine. They could have had rivers and fish and everything else, but it didn't rain. This mist is part of God's initial provision for the Garden of Eden, sustaining the earth before the creation of plant life. The imagery of mist and dew is significant because in the arid Near Eastern continent, dew was a vital source of moisture for plants and crops, especially in times of drought. Symbolism of in Scripture, dew in the Bible. It's divine blessing and favor. In Genesis 27:28, Isaac blesses Jacob with the dew of heaven as part of God's provision of prosperity. Dew in the Bible often symbolizes life and renewal. Hosea 14:5 compares God's restorative power to dew, which nourishes and revives. Dew in the Bible often symbolizes freshness and new beginnings. The dew of the morning appears fresh each day, symbolizing God's continual mercy and grace. Lamentations 3:22-23. God's quiet provision. Unlike storms, dew comes gently, reflecting the subtle yet essential ways God sustains his creation. In other words, you didn't need a storm. You didn't need rain. You didn't need hail. You didn't all that stuff that comes from the air that we got to worry about, which, by the way, last week with the lakes we were at, there was a lot of water upstream that dumped in there. And overnight, two things that I noticed watching that lake, two things happened. We were on there's several chains of dams along that deal. And so they started letting water out of the dam. So our water level didn't really rise that much. But below, it did. Downstream, all the boat docks and everything, there was lots of water. And it was wider because, the water spreads out. But where we were, it was not a problem because, in fact, with the sailboat versus the jet ski, I could hear the water running through those floodgates, which you also say, man, I don't want to lose wind and get sucked into that. But you could hear it going off the dam. The other thing that happened that was pretty amazing to me is looking out my window, I could see a big lake and lots of water. Overnight, a big part of that channel turned brown. It turned brown from all the water that is churned up from the rain and it's coming from upstream. And so looking down below the dam, all that water was brown. From where we were close to the dam, there was kind of bluish greenish waters on the edges, but the channel had the brown. But it was amazing how much brown was in that water. So it's quiet provision. Unlike storms, dew comes gently, reflecting the subtle yet essential ways God sustains his creation. The morning dew is a recurring metaphor for renewal and God's faithful provision. Just as dew refreshes the earth each day, believers are reminded that God's mercies are new every morning. This imagery calls for daily dependence on God, recognizing that spiritual vitality comes from his grace. In Genesis, the mist dew watering the ground is both a literal act of creation and a symbolic promise of God's sustaining presence. It foreshadows the broader biblical theme that God's provision, like morning dew, is essential, life-giving, and renewed daily. For believers, this imagery encourages trust in God's faithful care and a posture of readiness, much like the dew covered the earth in the morning. Genesis 7:11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day all of the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Everyone pretty much believes that it hadn't rained until then. And it was Noah had never seen rain. Nobody back then had seen rain because it didn't happen. The dew did everything. So there was no rain. So rain is kind of a curse in a way because it started coming before that. But God told Noah this is going to happen. And so the water that was, contained in the earth came up. And floods came up, the rains came down, that song? So that's what happened with Noah. And so Noah built a boat. Noah built a boat because God told him to. Noah survived because he built the boat. Now I want to throw in a little bit of comedy in here because there's some great quotes about Noah, but also about the Titanic. Remind your critics when they say you don't have the expertise or experience to do something that an amateur built the ark and the experts built the Titanic. Peyton Manning said that one. The Titanic was built by professionals. The ark was built by volunteers. That's from Barbara Bush. I looked for, could not find this one, but this is where those comments kind of came from. There was a person who survived the Titanic, and he said this, but nobody recorded who it was. And they said the professionals built the Titanic, but they didn't build it to survive an iceberg. And I could also use this part about water being dense. Well, ice is dense, but it's not dense as water. Otherwise, it would sink. So anyway, so we move forward. We know the Noah story and everything, but the water was a big deal then. So we move forward, Genesis 21, 14 through 19. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. Remember, this is Abraham's concubine. They had Ishmael, his first child. Sarah got mad, said, you got to get rid of her. You got to do this. So he gave her water. It's a desert. He gave her water. He gave her food and water and sent her with the boy. Sounds harsh, mean, cruel. I don't know. All those things. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, about a bow shot away. For she said, do not let the boy die. And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. Hagar was rewarded for her faith. They both should have died. They ran out of water. They ran out of food. They're in the desert. But God provided for them. And another thing that's kind of important to me, this verse does say about a bow shot away. Well, it depends on the bow, but, I guess she's still an earshot, but a bow shot away? What does that mean? Why is that there? Well, actually, Ishmael was the first archer. So bows really didn't exist until Ishmael did it. So this is somebody looking back and telling the story. How far was it? About a bow shot away. Before that time, they'd say, what's a bow shot? So this story was told, and the bow shot ends up in there because Ishmael was the first archer. Fun, fun, fun. One of the plagues, remember, when the Egyptians were under Pharaoh's hand, one of the plagues was against the water god Nun. Nun is the primordial Egyptian water god and representing the chaotic waters from which creation emerged. That's their story. Nun did the water and all this sort of stuff. Nun is also called Nu, is the personification of the primordial watery abyss that exists before creation. He is considered the first of all gods. In other words, they're saying water was before everything else, and the source from which the sun god Ra and the first land appeared. So let's look at that plague. We need water. We need to be able to drink it. We need to bathe. Water is important to us. Without water, I don't know what we do. Well, the plague was that all the water turned red, like blood. It was nasty. Probably a lot like, we get these algae blooms in the ocean. It's probably an algae bloom, red algae something, but it got everything. And so you couldn't do anything because the water's all messed up. So that was God telling the Egyptians, I'm more powerful than your first god, Nun. I'm more powerful than your water god, And remember the whole thing even about Moses coming to be without getting killed is that Pharaoh's daughter found him floating in the water. If she found him on the ground, they probably gotten rid of it. But she found this baby floating in the water, and obviously the maternal things kicked in, and she wanted him and took care of him as a baby. She was a young girl. He's a baby. Took him into the palace. Anybody says, oh, where did that come from? She says, the water god gave it to me. And in that water of the Nile, remember, there are crocodiles. So they're thinking, well, this baby survived the crocodiles. Water God must have had something into that. Okay, he's special. You can keep him. Not thinking, well, he's a Hebrew, you know. But their whole culture got this baby into the palace to begin with. Water. Okay. So how did the Egyptian slaves leave Egypt? Well, first off, when they talk about purity for Hebrews and everything else, but because they get into a lot of things, in Leviticus about you should marry within. I think it's actually probably more purity about faith, about their religion, than it is about genetics. They're not related. And why do I say that? Because when they freed the slaves in Egypt, they didn't free just the Hebrews. They freed all of the slaves from all these countries that Egypt had taken control of. So that's who left with Moses, was not just Hebrews, but it was all these people. And Pharaoh was like, get out of here. You've created too much mess. You've killed my son. You've spent 10 different places. Get out of here. And it said that God hardened his heart, changed him, and so he chased him. He's going to get him back. It took him a little while to say, who's washing my feet? Who's got my breakfast? Whatever. He's, okay, I got to go get him back. So he sends the army after him. What does God do? And it's, for some reason, I think, if you really look at the text, it says Yam Suf, which means reed sea, R-E-E-D, not Red Sea. Somehow, I think in our minds, we somehow took the red waters from the plagues and tried to say Red Sea instead of saying Reed Sea. Now, from what I understand, the Reed Sea is not a real deep, like Red Sea. It's a marshy area with reeds growing up, and it's not real deep. But it's incredibly muddy and nasty. So if the Hebrew people went into that, they're fair game for the Egyptians to come along and just start whacking away. They're stuck. They can't go through that. They can't go back. Pharaoh's behind them. So what does God do? God tells Moses to raise up his arms and his staff. And all night a wind, I think it was an east wind, I could be wrong. In Exodus 14, after the Israelites escaped slavery in Egypt, Pharaoh's forces pursued them to the sea. God commanded Moses to stretch out a staff over the waters, and a strong east wind drove the sea back, blowing all night. With the cloud, remember cloud, pillar of fire and cloud? The cloud got between Pharaoh and them to stop them. Was that cloud water? Fire and water? I don't know, but I'm going to wonder, that cloud was probably not smoke. It may have been water. So Pharaoh couldn't see them. And they just said, okay, let's wait till this clears. We'll go get them. But the cloud protected them, and then that east wind blew all night long and dried out the marsh. And it dried it out where they could walk over it. And so it no longer is wet and water. Took the water, pushed it out, created walls, and dried it out. So the Israelites crossed safely, where the Egyptians were drowned when the waters returned. Well, it also may have been that they got out there and closer to the shore. Water, even in our soil, water tends to drain. And so it may have been when the Pharaohs took their chariots and they started running out there after them, it was good. It was solid. But they got to the middle and it might have gotten a little muddy. Yeah. Okay. People walking across one way, a chariot with horses, another way. And so they probably all got in there, and now they're kind of getting their wheels stuck, and the horses are getting stuck, and they're kind of getting stuck. And then the water comes in and kills them. It's a pivotal moment in Israel's history, marking their deliverance from the bondage and God's covenant faithfulness. So God has sovereignty over nature. The act of rebuking the sea shows God's authority to control creation and intervene in the natural world. Divine deliverance. The drying of the sea symbolizes God making a way where there seems to be none, fulfilling his promise to rescue his people. Metaphor for life's challenges. Many interpret the Reed Sea as a metaphor for insurmountable insurmountable obstacles in life. The verse encourages trust in God's power to dry up such challenges and lead us through them. Baptismal imagery. The crossing is often seen as a type of baptism, representing passage from slavery, from freedom, from death to life, passing through the waters. Power. God's ability to transform chaos into order. Faithfulness. His commitment to deliver his people. And I think it's always funny on this whole thing that those people forget very quickly and just, you got 10 plagues. Why didn't they? They start complaining, grumble, grumble, grumble. Why? You just saw this stuff. God's got you. Where's the problem? Hope. A reminder that even life's reed seas, God can create a dry path. Guidance. The depths of the sea represent dangers, but God leads them through as a safe, open land. And they got through the mud, and it wasn't mud. In short, God dried up the Reed Sea as both a historical miracle and a timeless spiritual truth that God can turn overwhelming obstacles into safe passage when we trust him. Okay. Exodus 17, 1 through 7. The Israelites had camped at Rephidim. They started grumbling, complaining, whining. We're out of water. We're thirsty. Moses, we want some water. So Moses prays, and God says to go and strike the rock with his staff. So Moses goes to the rock, and he strikes it, and water comes out. And the people are like, water from a rock? Are you kidding me? But they fill up, and they survive, and they got water, and in the desert, they got water out of a rock. That's got to be impressive to see Moses hit it, and who would have ever thought that would happen? But you got to understand, moving forward, Numbers 21, 1 through 13, and this is important. In our minds, many times we think there's only one episode that God brought water from the rock. There's two. This is the second one. The first one, Moses was told to strike the rock. At Kadesh, after 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites again lacked water. God commanded Moses to speak to the rock before their eyes, but Moses struck it twice. In other words, he was thinking what happened last time, and he didn't follow the instructions. The instructions were, speak to the rock. Hey, rock, could you give me some water? Which sounds even more crazy than striking it. We could make an argument that, hitting it, maybe there's a fissure and there's water that's already ready, and his hitting it was just enough to make it break free. This time he's supposed to talk to it. He hits it. Nothing happens. So what do? Same thing again. He hits it again. He was not supposed to hit it in the first place. Water still came, but God told Moses and Aaron they would not enter the promised land because they did not uphold his holiness before the people. In other words, God's given them a bigger deal than just hitting it. God's saying, you just talk to it and I'll give you water. But he didn't. Judges 4. Jael is running, and he asks Sisera for water. She gives him milk. And then he falls asleep. Now, what's the difference in water and milk? Milk does have compounds in it that kind of make you sleep. That's when they talk about a glass of milk, if you're not lactose intolerant or whatever. But a glass of milk at bedtime does actually do some things for sleep. They've proven that. It has things in it. Babies sleep, not just because their tummy's full and not because of the sugars, and that's part of it, but milk actually has things that make them sleep. So she gave him milk, not water. He asked for water. He got milk. Did he complain? No. He's thirsty. Okay, fine. Does water quench your thirst better than milk? Yes. But he's running. He's in fear for his life. He'll take the milk, chug, chug. And then what does he do? He falls asleep. But they also put him under a rug or something. So if they came in looking for this guy, they wouldn't find him. And then he gets pegged. And so for those that don't remember the story of Sisera, which actually my son was joking about naming my grandbaby that, Sisera is the one who took the pit peg and the hammer and drove it through his skull while he slept. And then the people that were chasing him said, yep, here he is. I killed him. Water. Instead he got milk. David was fighting the Philistines in 1 Chronicles 11 and 2 Samuel 23. Why the Philistines had Bethlehem and why David refused its water is kind of the point of this. But so the Philistines had Bethlehem, and David was trying to take the city, and he wanted it. And so the Philistine garrison control was there, and David was hiding in the caves of Adullam. This was during the early years of David's rise, when the Philistines were a dominant power in the region and often occupied strategic towns. Bethlehem, though small, was David's hometown and a place of deep personal and cultural significance, so its capture by the Philistines was a symbolic and practical loss for him. David's longing for water from the well of Bethlehem was not a political demand, but a personal, nostalgic yearning. He remembered watering his flocks there as a shepherd boy, and the well is a symbol of life, covenant blessing, and home. When his 3 mighty men risked their lives to break through the Philistine lines, because he said, I'd really like a drink from the well of Bethlehem. You say that, and they're looking at it going, hey, boss, the Philistines got that place. It's not like I'm going to go get water. I'll go get water this way. Well, he wanted it from there. So what do? They risked their lives to break through the Philistine lines and brought back water. David refused to drink it. He poured it out to the Lord, saying, Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives to go get this? Why he refused? Symbolic value. The water was blood-bought. It had cost the lives of his men in a dangerous breach. But once they got a breach in the wall, then they could take the city. Covenant law, Leviticus 17:11-12, forbids consuming blood, so drinking it would have been a violation. Spiritual act. By pouring it out, David honored God as the rightful recipient of such a costly gift and honored his men's sacrifice. In short, the Philistines had Bethlehem because they controlled the region at the time, and David's refusal to drink its water was an act of loyalty, reverence, and obedience to God's law, turning a personal desire into a sacred offering. 1 Kings 18, Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It was a drought, so water was precious. And remember, he said, okay, I got a challenge for you guys. We'll build 2 altars. In fact, he was rebuilding an altar. That was kind of fun. He was rebuilding an altar that had been there to Yahweh. And they had an altar, he had an altar. And he said, okay, here's the deal. Without putting fire over there, you're going to try to ignite your fire. Talk to your god Baal and make it light up. And we're going to watch, and you do the fireworks. And they failed. They prayed, they chanted, they did this like all day long. They sang, they did everything they could think of. Nothing happened. You got to understand, it's a drought. It's dry. If you could do anything, it should light. There are actually bugs, I think I understand from somewhere I ran through, that there are bugs that can make fire start. Lightning, there's things that can just naturally create fire. They couldn't get their fire to burn. So Elijah takes his people, his altar's built, and now these priests are standing around, and he says, okay, got the thing built, got all the wood? Okay, water it down. What? Water it down. 12 jars of water on that wood. Why 12? 12 tribes of Israel. They had been unfaithful. So they water it all down, and the princes of Baal, the priests of Baal are looking at this going, this guy's crazy. He's going to fail too. He's going to fail worse than we did because now his wood's wet. And guess what? It burns. And so now Ahab listens to Elijah. His God is stronger than theirs, than Baal. Baal lost. Well, after it was over, basically he lets Elijah decide what he wants to do, and so he takes him in the valley of Kidron, and he takes them to the brook Kishon, water, and he has them slayed in there. Takes them down to the river and kills them all. Because Elijah said it was okay. Ahab said it's fine. Go for it. Elijah, you won. They're yours. They're worthless. But he also tells Ahab a storm is coming. You know, storms involve rain. Something's coming. More water. Anyway, so that's that story. What temperature does water boil? Depends on the pressure. So, like at sea level, we know it's 100 degrees Celsius or 212 Fahrenheit. At altitude, it boils and you don't even see it bubble, it just disappears. Mountain climbers, you don't really see it. Well, I mean, you don't see boiling water, it just vaporizes, which is kind of scary because, like, I want to boil this before I drink it. You're not going to know it's boiling. I've actually seen it, it's really weird. You know, it kind of goes. So, here is also an interesting fact about water. When we go to the other extreme, from water that is frozen cold to water that's hot. For Elijah, not only did that burn the wood, it burned the rocks and it burned the soil, and of course the water all vaporized. But the fire was a really big thing and it burned everything. It was an impressive fire created because God did it. And my dad was an engineer and he said, yeah, stones will burn if you get them hot enough. And so some of these castles in England, once they got it hot enough, they did burn. Rocks will burn. Rocks can also explode if they have enough water in them, because I told you, 1 cc of water can be 10 cc's if you turn it into a vapor. So when you boil water, it creates a much larger volume. It'll become 10 times the size. So why is that important? Why does 1 cc of water becoming 10 times the size create an issue? Well, how did we get a steam engine? We did it because they could take this water, turn it to steam, and it would boil. Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah's tunnel was also known as the Siloam Tunnel. Why was it called the Siloam Tunnel? Because the pool of Siloam is where that water ended up. There were springs that were there, but the water would go from the springs through the area to Siloam. But it didn't always go that way. So how did that work? Somebody had started digging before, and then Hezekiah decided that he wanted that spring to go from outside of the walls of the city inside of the walls. So in other words, he's going to take the spring, bring it in, and then cover it up so nobody knows where it is, and you'd have to really work to dig it back up. Hezekiah's tunnel is mentioned in 2 Kings 20:20 and 2 Chronicles 32:30, which describe King Hezekiah's efforts to fortify Jerusalem against the Assyrian threat. In seminary, one of our profs always said, good King Hezekiah. That's how you remember him, was good. The Bible records that good King Hezekiah blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and redirected the waters to the pool of Siloam within the city walls, ensuring a reliable water supply during a potential siege by Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. These passages highlight Hezekiah's combination of faith in God and practical leadership in protecting his people. Historical and archaeological significance. The tunnel is approximately 1,750 feet long. That's about a third of a mile. If 5,280 feet is a mile, 1,700 is about a third, I guess, roughly. It was carved through solid rock with Stone Age tools. I've been there. We'll talk about it. Workers began digging at both ends and met in the middle. A feat that's confirmed by the Siloam inscription, an ancient Hebrew text found inside the tunnel that describes the moment the two teams met. The inscription provides direct archaeological evidence of the tunnel's construction and coordination. Radiocarbon and other dating methods suggest the tunnel was built during Hezekiah's reign, late 8th century BC, although some scholars debate whether parts of the tunnel may have been dug before him. Okay, fine. Possibly originate in the 9th or early 8th century BC. Regardless, the tunnel demonstrates advanced hydraulic engineering and strategic planning, ensuring Jerusalem's water supply remained protected from any enemy forces. The tunnel's construction involved hydraulic engineering to maintain a steady flow from the Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam. In other words, the tunnel has to always go down. If the tunnel goes up, the water doesn't go. So you're saying from point A to point B, it has to go down. Acoustic guidance. This is one of the things that they think helped them dig the tunnels. They think. We don't know because we weren't there. That they thought that sound you could hear, get quiet in the middle of the night. You could tap on the wall and maybe tell where the other side was. But still, that's like a third of a mile to dig that thing. They have any modern stuff like, okay, here's a GPS. I go here, I'll connect. They just they carve through solid limestone, requiring precise coordination without modern tools. This project reflects both the ingenuity of ancient Judahite engineers and the strategic foresight of Hezekiah's administration. Hezekiah told them to do it. Okay, so I've been there. So you get in there, and the water levels can be different at different times. When we were there, you'd roll your pants up. I started out about to mid-thigh, and it was fine. Mid-calf. But as we walked, there are parts that are deeper. So you have to bring your pants up to about your knees. It never really got above our knees. It never got to your waist. But you walk through this thing, and some parts are bigger than others. But overall, it kind of is like more like this. It's bigger here, but then it gets smaller at the top. And so it's like your human body. Shoulders are good. You walk. However, the height is not the same. It's also dark down there. There's no lights. So they took us, and we had our little headlights and everything else, and we went through there. And at first, people were kind of like a little nervous. You'd hear people doing weird things. And then at one point, people started turning off their lights. And so then you would put your hand on the person in front of you. And the other thing that I would do is I'd take one hand and stick it up so that I knew the height, so I didn't hit my head. But you'd put your hand on the one in front of you and you'd walk. And this is like 30 of us, young adults. And the other thing about this that I'll always remember and never forget, this group was weird because a lot of groups I've been with, they sing. We do stuff. We sing verses, sing songs, whatever, Well, I would have thought, hey, this is a good time to sing Showers of Blessing. I don't know. But this group didn't sing, and I didn't learn that, so I didn't worry about it. But the one song that they had prepared, and they actually had prepared this song, is they sang the doxology. So the doxology, and I was in the bass section. Some of the guys, they were all, we were all spread out, but quite frankly, more of the guys were around me, and some of the girls were up front and whatever. But, it was all different. My daughter's in there. My son's up there somewhere. We're all in there. And they started singing the doxology. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. You don't know how much rock's above you, but there's a lot. It's solid. Praise him above the heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And that's it. But it was beautiful. The other thing that we have talked about with water is, remember, water is also for them a blessing, because if it's a drought, it rains, that's a blessing. Water was viewed as a blessing. So when they say blessings flow, it was literally water was God's the source of the water where blessings flow. Theological and symbolic significance. Hezekiah's tunnel is also seen as a symbol of divine providence and human responsibility. Let's have faith, but do your part too. The Bible narrative emphasizes that Hezekiah's trust in God was accompanied by practical action to protect his people, illustrating a balance of faith and wisdom. The tunnel's successful completion and Jerusalem's survival during the Assyrian siege are often interpreted as manifestations of God's protection over the city. Modern relevance. Today, Hezekiah's tunnel remains accessible to visitors and continues to be a significant archaeological and historical site in Jerusalem. It provides a tangible connection to the biblical account and offers insight into the city's ancient infrastructure, engineering capabilities, and the historical context of Hezekiah's reign. Living water versus stagnant water. We think of living water as flowing and moving, and stagnant water obviously is just water that doesn't move. And if you take water and you put it in a bucket and leave it outside long enough, you're going to have mosquitoes and it's going to look nasty. It's going to just get nasty. Moving water, the oxygen changes. Mosquitoes can't live in oxygen water and that kind of stuff, so it changes what's going on. Water's different because of what's being done. With one exception, I always remember that I loved Bruce's mom's water pitcher at her house. His mom would put water in a pitcher and put it in the refrigerator. I grew up in West Texas. It would be, we get up to 110 in the summer, not just hundreds, but we get up there. It's a desert. Well, if you got water from that pitcher, it was always good. Why? It's just water. And in fact, I saw her. She got it out of the tap. She just poured in and put it in the fridge. Was it the cold? Oh, no, I thought it tasted different too. Thinking back and being a chemistry major, I know it was different. And here's how it was different. By sitting in that refrigerator for a period of time, chlorine that we sterilize our water with, we put in the water systems, the chlorine bubbles out. So that water didn't have as much chlorine in it when you drank it. And so it did taste better, and it was cold. So Bruce's mom's stagnant water was one time that was really good. But, I guess you can actually do the same thing, I guess, by, aerating and getting the chlorine out. But that's kind of what happens. It set and the chlorine kind of bubbled out. It was good. But generally we want living water. Old Testament themes of living water and water symbolism. In the Old Testament, living water is a powerful metaphor for God's life-giving presence, spiritual refreshment, and enduring blessing. It contrasts with stagnant or broken cisterns, symbolizing God as only true source of life and purity. Israel has lots of cisterns. They actually collect their rainwater. There is a mountain that the Romans were trying to take, and the people that were trying to defend it, the people of Israel, defending the mountain from the Romans, you had to kind of narrow pathways to get up to it, and they could throw stuff down on them and everything else. The Romans couldn't get there. And they could survive because they had these huge cisterns carved into this mountain. So whenever it would rain, it filled up the cisterns, and the cisterns were up at the top. So they had plenty of water. Food was kind of an issue, but they had water. And with water, they could do a lot of things and go longer. And so the Romans, what did they do? The Romans actually took slave labor and built a ramp to get to the top of that thing. And so there's a huge encampment. You can still see where that the Romans lived. And every day they just moved dirt to build a ramp to get up there because too many were dying trying to attack it. But the cisterns kept those people alive too. In the Old Testament, living water is a powerful metaphor for God's life-giving presence, spiritual refreshment, enduring blessing. Jeremiah 2:13. My people have forsaken me, the fountain of living water. Jeremiah 17:13. O Lord, the hope of Israel, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Zechariah 14:18. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem. These verses explicitly link God himself to the source of living water. Okay, I'm just going to run through. We're running out of time. I got one page of just things to throw out with water still in them from the rest of Old Testament. I said I couldn't even get to New Testament. Isaac's servants find a well of living water, flowing water. Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. Isaac was told that if he goes to the well, the woman that offers him water is the one he's supposed to marry. God pours water on the thirsty land in his spirit of his people. That's Isaiah 44:3. Psalm 46:4. There's a river whose stream make glad the city of God. You can guarantee those people are happy to have that tunnel during Ezekiel 47:1-12. A river flows from the temple, bringing life to the land. Psalm 1:3. The righteous are like a tree planted by streams of water. Isaiah 58:11. The righteous will be like a well-watered garden. Water in the Old Testament often represents purification and renewal. And there's ritual washings in Leviticus 14:8, Ezekiel 36:25. Before the priest could go in the temple, they had to do all this bathing, and their clothes had to be clean. And God's provision and faithfulness, spiritual life and blessing, hope and salvation. Converging theme: God as the only true source of living water. The coming kingdom is a place where living water flows outward to heal the nations. The outpouring of the Spirit tied to imagery of water being poured out. In summary, the Old Testament's living water imagery is both literal and spiritual, pointing to God's sustaining presence, cleansing power, and the promise of eternal life. It sets the stage for Jesus' own teaching in John 4:14, where he identifies himself as the source of this living water. And if you don't know Jesus, you need to. And all you got to do is ask him to come in your heart, confess your sins, and believe, and you will be saved. Thank you.
Great day. And thank you for tuning in to A New Day Fellowship Church. We are so grateful that you joined us, and we pray that you were blessed by hearing God's living word. May his message inspire you to continue walking in faith, trusting that he is working all things together for your good. As we close out this service, feel free to leave a word of encouragement in the comments and share your testimony with others. Together, we can inspire and uplift those around us to live for God. Remember, this is your season. Hold on to his promises, stand firm in your faith, and watch as God does great things in your life. Continue to be blessed, and we look forward to seeing you again. Stay encouraged and keep shining